Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event.
Where maybe later you can also make some signs for maybe time.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you in this room and also on YouTube. It's with great pleasure that, in behalf of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, I welcome everyone to the session 7 of this new Heritage Approaches webinar as part of the 2021 debate promoted by the Our World Heritage movement. I will talk a little bit about the session. This session 7 is participatory processes and new narratives in heritage, the role of civil society. Historically, driven by technical knowledge using criteria based on aesthetic and historical values, the field of heritage has been challenged since the 1960s to think about the place of social values. It's necessary and urgent to examine policies of participation and the authorized heritage discourse, and to consider who can select heritage and for whom it is selected, how to think of more inclusive practices, how do we listen sensitively with implications for public heritage policies. One of the challenges and opportunities to build robust strategies to overcome top-down approaches and involve civil society in conservation and preservation of World Heritage Sites is the intertuning of diversity and multiple cultural influences enabled by heritage education. This session seeks to bring together approaches, experiences, and tools for including diverse social perspectives and to stimulate strategies that will include their knowledge, feelings, and affections in the existing geopolitical context involved in the conservation of World Heritage. Now I will present our panelists, Hendrik and Gert. Hendrik Tiben, he is from Hong Kong. He is associate professor and director of Discover Architecture, Urban Studies, and Urban Design at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Topic, he will talk about new approaches to urban and industrial heritage in Hong Kong. Welcome, Hendrik, and also thank you so much for being here. Gert Han Burgess, he's from Netherlands, VU University Amsterdam, age 2020, Marie Skolodowska-Curie Project Harryland. He works with cultural heritage and the planning of European landscapes. He will combine two subjects, the thinking ecomuseology and training critical heritage planners. I welcome Gert also, and thank you guys for being here with us. And I hope you will just present and bring us some ideas to discuss, debate, and also to study later on. I will just start with inviting Hendrik to start his talk. Thank you, Hendrik.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Wait, maybe just give me a second to start my PowerPoint. This is another one. Okay, 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 just a second. Okay, so good morning, everybody in Brazil. Where I am in Hong Kong, we have already evening. So I'm very happy that I can be part of this conference. Just because you will see my title is a little bit different from the one that we announced. Um, Seeing that this session is particularly also focusing on education and participatory processes, I decided to focus on one particular project that we did that is more emphasizing these aspects. We also have currently an interesting project that is related to industrial heritage with various colleagues, and I might later share a link. If you're interested, you can more look at that aspect. Now, I'm not so sure how much you know about the heritage discourse in Hong Kong. Basically, there has been a kind of very intensive discourse on heritage in the early 2000s. And at the beginning of my talk, I will very quickly brush over that to give you a little bit of context. And then also to explain maybe the backdrop in front of which we basically developed then our projects that I will present in the second part, which I would say is slightly more linked, we can say, to community design and placemaking. But I believe that placemaking and heritage actually have a lot of things in common, and also as maybe contributions to questions of what urban heritage could be and so on. And then at the end, I will just give a very short comment maybe on some thoughts now in view of the pandemic, or we are where we are at the moment with our projects, because obviously it's a bit kind of constrained what you can do with communities at the moment. Yeah. So just for those that are not so familiar with heritage debate in Hong Kong, there has been a very intensive debate, if not in form even as big civil society protests that happened in the early 2000s. So just for your memory, 1997, Hong Kong was given back to the People's Republic of China, which of course created a lot of discussions and thoughts about the identity of Hong Kong, and as a former British colony, and then now as a special administrative region of China. And many discussions and actually very large protests formed when several key buildings were demolished for urban development in Hong Kong. One was the Star Ferry, and shortly afterwards the Queen's Pier, with a land reclamation project in central Hong Kong, and with tens of thousands of people protesting against the demolition at that time. So these were more singular buildings, but many of the other discussions were also related not to individual buildings, which in very small numbers are protected in Hong Kong, but only, I think, a very small part, and certainly not like, for example, the Star Ferry Pier buildings from the 1950s are usually not protected in Hong Kong. But other and also very important discussions about heritage were more related with this anonymous urban fabric, more, or typical urban areas from the 1950s that were in the relationship to big new urban renewal projects um, demolished and restructured. One of the quite famous projects was or area was the area of Litung Street, which was a former wedding card street. So everyone who would plan a wedding in Hong Kong would go there to find everything from clothes to printing wedding cards and so on. Everything related to this with a big cluster of local businesses. And on the other hand, this area was demarcated for urban renewal, and there were a lot of protests, but also it was the first time that, in fact, people from the community, together with professional architects, made alternative projects to the one of the government, with the proposal or with the demand, if this not could be realized, to still also maybe respond to some of the points of the government, but on the other hand, basically collectively from the community come up with an alternative plan. This didn't happen, and in the meantime, so the area was then demolished, and on the right side you see the it's not a reconstruction, it's basically the new project of Litung Street. At the beginning, it was still said, oh, there will be something related to a wedding theme, but then it actually was only like basically high-end retail. And what you see there are obviously not old buildings, but brand new buildings that never have existed in this kind. And it's only the circle for a kind of very large scale, big high-rise buildings with expensive apartments. Um, Other projects that happened were projects where historical buildings were kept, but then redeveloped in a very strange way. Here, for example, we have a market from the 1930s, the One-Chai Market, which has this streamlined modernist architecture and was then basically used as a base for a huge residential upscale residential tower, and basically just leaving this as a stage set, you can say, right? Now, while there has been a lot of critique and protest and so on against some of those projects, more recently also very interesting projects have been realized. The most famous, or maybe I have it here, is the Blue House complex. Is a complex of various buildings that are related to the grassroots history in Hong Kong, and also a kind of early medical service, and a place where many local grassroots people lived together, also with local stores and so on, which was renovated or regenerated in a very careful way by keeping a certain percentage of the former residents, creating public spaces, also a house of stories, and so on. And this kind of much more sensitive project then won also a UNESCO Award of Excellence in 2017, and is representing one of those projects, maybe one of the very, very few that is related to uh, um, community participation and so on. Although, even though it's now very much celebrated, it was a very long time not clear that this outcome would happen, because originally it was also planned to be reorganized in a very different way, and only through a lot of civil society push then became this project. While many people, I think, are quite happy about this project, it also, one of the points of criticism, not of this project, but in general, a thought is like how much this is just more like one of the few projects, almost as an excuse for the very large scale transformation that is happening in the same district in very different ways. And that is an ambivalence we all have to work in, and also same for our own project in the same area. Just I have this other slide here. Maybe let me go back one. So I think if we would summarize some of the big trends in the kind of change, or I would more say expansion of the Hong Kong heritage discourse in the 2000s, was that from something that was more related to professionals and academics, it really became a very important issue for local communities and for civil society groups that were major forces in pushing and demonstrating and pushing for heritage preservation. There's definitely a trend from individual buildings to urban areas. That's of course nothing new for other parts of the world where we have historical areas in cities that are preserved. In Hong Kong, it actually doesn't exist. Basically, everything that is preserved are individual buildings. Of course, we have country parks that are preserved as big areas, but more for the landscape qualities and for various other reasons, but not in urban areas, which also has to do with a particular way of how the government in Hong Kong is finances basically through land lease. It's one of the biggest incomes of our government and basically allows us all to pay very little tax. We are all part of that in a way also, right? Is a part of the Hong Kong system, which is very competitive, maybe in view of taxes and so on, but on the other hand, uh, has this kind of very fast urban metabolism in transforming entire urban areas in a very fast pace, and where there has never been a very strong commitment from the government to preserve larger urban areas, also because for that reason. Another thing is, of course, as in other parts of the world, like many of those points also, there has been also a very intensive debate on tangible and intangible aspects of heritage. As we have seen also in the project of the Blue House, there was a house of stories integrated, and also maybe as a contrast to the Wan Chai market, where basically it's just a kind of facade kept. Right? Now, I come to a project that we developed, which I present here, particularly because it's related to education and work with communities. As I said, maybe it is strictly speaking slightly more placemaking projects and communities are in project, but I would say that placemaking and heritage, particularly in Hong Kong, also we have this kind of very strong trend that after this heritage debate, it also shifted more into something that is heritage plus public space, or I would say heritage plus placemaking as something that of course is related to communities and duration of time, right? So this is just a project that we developed, and I've presented also in other contexts, which started as a public space project, but also had a dimension, I would say, that is very much related to oral history and community engagement and later also maybe empowerment to a certain degree of the local neighborhood. And which very much worked not necessarily with the preservation of buildings necessarily, but also very strongly used, for example, videos, websites, and other media to capture something of the intangible heritage of a place. It was related to an urban area in Hong Kong, on Hong Kong Island, basically 2 stops from Central, from the financial center, where at that in early 2000s was not yet a metro line to this particular area, and then was extended and opened then in 2015. And we studied this area because we saw that this new metro line would come, and we basically studied then 3 years before and 3 years after the opening how the area transformed. But while we were studying this, we also had the feeling that because of this very fast change, that one should do something that to help the older residents to somehow link to new residents and keep some of the spirit of the place, but also allow a better form of transition and also together with an improvement of public spaces and so on. Just here some photos. This is a central area of this particular district, which is called Sai Pun, and a very vibrant part of Hong Kong, which was laid out in the 1860s, particularly as a kind of working class area, also very much related to the harbor with go downs at the water, and people would walk down and then here a lot of mixed use shop houses and so on. Sometimes quite crowded conditions, but on the other hand, also very vibrant street scenes. Today, the same space looks like this. The market stalls were taken away and put into markets. This was just a construction site; it's not always here, but we see it's a little bit of a lost space, even though it sits there and it's called Center Street and it's the center of this neighborhood, and we felt like it waits to be something else than this because it looked quite sad actually. You know? So maybe if we go back to this image, right, as a center of the neighborhood is quite sad. Now, our project was then basically to say, particularly also with myself being a foreigner in Hong Kong and also as academics anyway, it's quite difficult, of course, to reach the community. So one way how we tried to bridge this gap was to work with a local secondary school in this particular area, and basically use these young secondary school kids as community ambassadors and send them out to make video interviews about how people in the neighborhood experience the transformation in the area, talk about their memories about the place, but also their aspirations and fears of the future. And also as a way also to reboot an alternative public participation process, which is in Hong Kong exists, but it's kind of a very much on the Einstein's ladder, like on the very low level of consultation. Maybe have either scheme A or B, but they're both the same basically, right? And to reboot in a more creative way, but also a more engaging way, people in the area, and to do this with looking back and capturing the voices of the people in the area. Here we see the students working. This is Johnny, who then afterwards started to study film. I think he's now finishing soon his film studies. And then maybe I can quickly switch, if I still have time, to a website that we built related to this, because the website became an important part also in the project. So which on one hand has the history of the area, right? It has a timeline, but it has also then other aspects like an archive. And in this archive, we have little proposals of old photos of the areas, but also a whole range of interviews of people in the neighborhood that were all taken by those secondary school kids from the neighborhood. Another interesting part is that basically there is a map that basically also shows where each of those videos was actually taken to basically create a link between the narratives and the stories, right? So you would always have these kind of links, and you can also click in the spaces and then get photos of back alleys and street spaces and so on, as a way to keep something of this kind of very fast transforming area. Maybe I can just kind of play a half a minute of a video.
我喺度啊，做咗下啦。你問我計幾多年，我都計唔到計啦。喺個街市60幾年，住喺第一街，80樓度。不係雙盤，以前咧，梗係中意雙盤啦，喺度逛啊嘛，一和盤求到下嘅，梗係逛嘅，梗係可以中意呢個雙盤。
Lady, for example, is still came at that time every day to the store, to her store, or the now store of her son, with 91 years. and we wanted also to capture this whole ecology of those stores as a part of the memory of the place and very important social spaces, which of course what we also wanted to show that these stores are not just commercial spaces. They are basically community places for community encounter and for belonging of the people, because basically this lady only comes there, of course, to be in touch with all the neighbors and so on, right? Okay, so maybe I quickly try to move on from there. One important part of our projects was then always to link these works with the students with special events, which were these mid-autumn um, moonlight cinemas, where then on a big screen these interviews would be shown with the voices of the residents. So not loud music, but just kind of the voice of the people. And then with the people, of course, we invited them, the shopkeepers, as well as secondary school kids with their parents and so on, to try to rebuild this community as one of the stages of our projects. This became just a kind of starting point of a longer engagement in this area, but then also in 3 other areas in the new territories and also in Kowloon, to capture like different urban conditions in Hong Kong. We were then lucky that we could, with a fund, an urban renewal fund by the government, which is actually paid by some of the profit that was made by these kind of very large scale developments. So it's also a bit kind of maybe ambivalent. To build up our own community studio together with Caritas, with social workers of Caritas, where on an everyday basis we could work, or the team that we then Caritas and we could employ, work with the community on various community activities that often were also related to old festivals, and also important because now we have kind of the old residents, but also very new, very different residents coming to the area. Also with the plan to transform also the public space around the area. We had then various events, placemaking events, where students were involved and students decorated these places for moonlight festivals. This is a kind of very old shrine. I'm almost done, I think. Old shrine, probably one of the oldest religious places in that part of Hong Kong, over 100 years old, which is was part of the considerations. And other projects, like, for example, little newspaper stands that were renovated and so on, and co-design workshops around the area. Over the time, what was quite nice that residence groups formed, like, for example, the Friends of Sheung Kung Lane, which is the name of that lane, that then started their planting exercises and ceramic workshops and so on, as a way of community building, but also connecting the old and the new residents in this project. Now, as I already said, this is not, strictly speaking, maybe a heritage preservation project. Also because in that area there are actually some heritage projects, which also we worked also together with another institution, Cache, to involve them in our projects, but maybe slightly more a placemaking project. But it shows maybe a similar approach and is an example for many projects. I would not say that we are in any way special. There are many kind of civil society organizations, universities at the moment in Hong Kong working on such projects. And the Blue House that I showed before is part, I would say, of such kind of activities. Now, maybe because I think I need to wrap up, we have, of course, in Hong Kong also the pandemic, obviously, and that affects a lot, particularly our specific ways of working with local communities. And because obviously, for a long while, it was the community studio had to close. It was a time where we also had just kind of applied for new funding, and then it was difficult to get this kind of new funding also under these kind of circumstances. So at the moment, there's not much kind of going on. Which of course also brought us to questions like how we deal with the situation, and also how we will work in the future. In our personal case, we started then to engage with the pandemic, not in this particular area, which is, I would say, slightly more middle class, and also I think the community studio also tried to support the neighborhood with masks and so on, but it was because it's maybe not the poorest area in Hong Kong, maybe not the one that needed very urgent help so much than others. And we started in another neighborhood, also with characters that knew us from this project, to work with people in subdivided flats in very kind of grassroots conditions, to work with them, using also these similar strategies of working with communities, but then in a more in smaller focus group interviews and so on, that only by our research team and not by students and so on, and social workers, to control the numbers. And in this case, we focused more in creating community maps. This is something, it's almost ready and now. It's a community map that was created based on the input of the local residents on their routines there, but also the knowledge of open spaces and resources and internet and so on, where they can public toilets and so on, where one can use to support the local community. So basically, the community design and placemaking part continued, but in this particular case, the part of heritage is at the moment, maybe also because of these urgent mental health in Hong Kong, is maybe more mental health issues than people really infected by the virus, more the pressure, economic pressure and so on, to deal with this. I also want to, coming slowly to an end, I want talking about education, talk about one initiative that we launched together with Vera Tangari, who made the introduction, and also with Miodrag Mitrasinovic from Parsons in New York. So we just finished a global online workshop. I'm together with basically Rio de Janeiro, New York, and Hong Kong. And in this case, we also focused on cultural heritage, maybe also with a particular input from the Brazilian team. And with very interesting outcomes. In itself, might be interesting to talk more about it. The time is not here at the moment. However, I think what was interesting in students' projects, that in addition to questions of inclusivity and the big question of who represents heritage and who is part of it, I think that was a central point. Another discussion was also that to a certain degree how pandemic and heritage also go together, right? Okay, I want to stop here because I think we have a second talk. Maybe we can come back to some of those points in the discussion. I just want to mention for you that for time reasons, and also because this project is not related to education so much, it's done by a university, but not and it's also with a big community input as well, but not yet used for us for only in a small degree for educational purposes. Um, if you are interested in Hong Kong and kind of current things that are going on, this was something we were working on. It's more specifically related to heritage and industrial landscapes, mining landscapes that you might not imagine that they exist there, but also with very interesting kind of community aspects. And I might just send you the link if you want to know what's going on in Hong Kong, maybe, or like there are many things going on. We are only a very small part of it, but that because that's related to a team where I'm belonging to, and maybe some of the things that are also inspired by these earlier community projects in this way in terms of working with the local community. Okay, I would end here. So thank you for having the opportunity to talk, and I give the word to Vera. We cannot hear you, I think.
You want me to start immediately, Vera? Yes, great. Thank you very much, Hendrik, for that fantastic talk. Very interesting. I told you already that I'm going to visit you in Hong Kong. Thank you all to the organizers for this very important series of sessions. I think this is really important that once in a while we rethink the concept of World Heritage and, let's say in the context of ongoing discussions on theory and practice. So that's what we're doing today here within this session on the one hand, participatory projects, participatory, let's say, citizen participation, and on the other hand, education. And that's what I'm going to focus on. Let me indeed share. I've got a problem with the sun, which is quite extraordinary in the Netherlands at the moment. We haven't seen the sun for a month. So here we go. Yes. I told you citizen participation is the point of departure of my presentation, and I've been involved personally with participation for a couple of decades now. And right from the beginning, I must say that I've understood that this is not only about practice, not only about doing. This is also about a whole series of questions, of course. Who is involved? Which part of the community is involved, of course? What are the goals that you wish to reach? What are the interests, of course, of the various groups involved, and etc. Especially also, what is the broader societal context? What are the let's say the broader societal developments that you wish to participate in and that you have to be aware of course. I mean, you talk about Hong Kong, Hendrik, and indeed it is important to contextualize it and not to isolate single participatory actions. So that's, realizing this, a couple of years ago, that is a whole series of colleagues, we joined into an initiative, into a consortium, trying to put up a training network in which citizen participation was a major element. And very fortunately, this initiative was then financed one major grant from the European Marie Curie Action, and we are now doing it. Actually, doing this international training network, ITN as it is called. It is called Cultural Heritage and the Planning of European Landscapes, and as you can see, the acronym is HERILAND. So that's what I wish to start with, to gradually dive into the subject of citizen participation. So this is the team that we're working with, 15 PhDs and a whole, let's say, bunch of supervisors, teachers involved. And it's a project which runs for 4 years until 2023. But, I mean, we wish to set up a sustainable graduate school training. So indeed, I mean, the training initiative is at the graduate level, and it is focused on, let's say, training the new heritage professional, the new heritage manager, who can plan and design future heritage landscapes. So these are basically the three major goals of the overall project. First of all, to do research, that is to define and evaluate a new standard in cultural heritage management embedded in spatial planning and design. Secondly, training, and that's the subject of today's session, to build a sustainable international training network in heritage planning. We think that indeed we need to a certain degree also a kind of homogenization in training, considering that training is very, let's say, compartmentalized in general. And the third goal is valorization, to anchor this in academic, professional, and also governmental context. And you understand how important this is, since when training remains just isolated, that is, and then when it remains to the academic context, it remains highly theoretical. So we wish to link it above all also to governmental context, from local municipalities to national as well as international, for instance, the EU and the World Heritage Convention. So, well, I would like to start with this slide, which doesn't immediately explain what the project is about. It is maybe what the project is not about. That is about isolated World Heritage monuments. No, actually, this is what the project is about. Um, that is contextualizing heritage. Contextualizing heritage in a much broader perspective, actually seeing all landscapes, whether we are dealing with rural and marginal landscapes, whether we're dealing with industrial and urban landscapes, or with, well, let's call them energy landscapes, or with the traditional heritage landscapes, and we see to the right and the bottom. These landscapes all have potential heritage value. So we don't focus on specific heritage objects, but we focus on the broader spatial context. And in developing these, let's say, landscapes, we focus on potential heritage issues, on potential heritage objects. So that is what the project is about. And we do that indeed with citizen participation. Let me briefly go through the state of affairs in heritage management, just again to make you understand what we stand for. Let's say how we wish to go beyond the state of affairs. First of all, as all of you know, much heritage is behind bars. It is highly protected, isolated from societal and spatial development, renewal, for instance, urban renewal. Um, Secondly, and that is again, I can't. I've got problems with the light, but no, yes. Secondly, most heritage approaches are is focused on iconic iconic objects. I hear a sound. Could all the microphones be turned off, maybe?
Please,
Maybe you can
Vera,
mute
Vera,
yourself.
please mute your microphone, please. Please, Landy and Vera.
Thank you. So I show you this image of the Acropolis, of course, to show that most heritage objects are focused on, let's say, high culture and major monuments, and they are quite often also perceived from a so-called essentialist perspective. That is, they are thought to embody an essence. They are thought to have an intrinsic value, and that value is quite often linked to a specific culture and a specific people. And in this case, of course, I mean, yes, we are talking about World Heritage, but we are especially talking about Greek culture, of course. This is, let's say, the way heritage is quite often perceived. Um, Another state of affairs in heritage management is that there is a lot of theory going on about participation, for instance, about how to translate historical biographies or narratives in general to the practice of heritage management. But in practice, indeed, there is a clear contrast between theory and practice. And that's something which we wish to solve with our project. Then a clear disciplinary boundary. This is the Berlin Wall, of course, a metaphor for the disciplinary boundaries that are very prominent in heritage management. Think of the past-oriented studies that claim heritage as their domain against the future-oriented studies like the architects, and I mean Hendrik is one of them also, who indeed work with heritage in the practice of urban development, for instance. And then there are national boundaries. Since heritage is quite often perceived from an essentialist perspective as representative of a national culture, that explains to a large degree why indeed the national boundaries are still very strong. Of course, our World Heritage, the World Heritage Convention is an effort to go beyond it, but still, national boundaries are even very strong within the World Heritage context, of course. Now, as I told you, we wish to go beyond the state of affairs, and we wish to create a sustainable training network with a focus on, first of all, positioning heritage within social and spatial dynamics. That is then not isolating it, taking actually the social and spatial dynamics as our point of departure to see, to understand how heritage can be integrated, how heritage can contribute to the social and spatial challenges. Co-creation and design, co-design that meets, of course, the goal of this session today about participation. We wish to stimulate inter and transdisciplinarity. We think really that this is important. Having historians and archaeologists collaborate or fuse even with architects and planners and designers and governance scholars, bridging theory and practice and be transnational. I think we need a transnational perspective to critically observe our, well, let's say, narrow national glasses. So this is what we do basically. We focus on heritage, we teach, we train our PhDs in treating heritage within the context of pressing societal challenges, like, for instance, democratization or changing environments and the energy transition, demographic changes, shifting demographies, and the multicultural society, or the digital transformations. Of course, we know, everybody knows that the digital turn is going to completely change also our perception of heritage. Well, I mean, how can we adapt to all this? This is what our project is about. Well, very briefly, something about the structure of the college. We've got, as I've indicated here, local, interlocal, and network-wide teaching modules. So the local is at each single university. We've got involved the Amsterdam University, Bezalel Academy in Israel, Newcastle University, Göteborg University, TU Delft, and Roma Tre University. 6 universities, and they all teach their PhDs at the local level. But then we also come together in smaller groups, interlocal teaching. And then we also come together next week, for instance, we have got a network-wide masterclass on shifting demographies organized by Mike Turner from Bezalel University, which of course you all know is closely involved in the Our World Heritage Initiative. So at various levels we do training, and basically in the end, I'm just trying to summarize these slides. Basically in the end, we hope that we hope to have trained the PhDs in conceptual skills, methodological skills, as well as operational skills, but besides that, also generic, so-called transferable skills like entrepreneurial skills. These people also should be able maybe to set up an enterprise, to set up a business in this, or to communicate to the public or in a wider context. So communication skills, and above all, also leadership skills. We think that indeed these people should take the lead should be able, first of all, to lead their own progress, but above all, in teaching others again. Now, what does this all have to do with the participatory action? Um, well, to show you, I mean, yes, I just go back to this slide. As you can see, we have got so-called living labs, which are areas which are, let's say, periods of training in specific areas, so to bring theory into practice. One of these is the so-called eco-museum of the Via Appia. And it is here that some PhDs and I myself are working on citizen participation. Again, trying to, let's say, experiment to a certain degree and experiment with theory in practice. Now, this is where we also start to rethink eco-museums. Eco-museums, it's a concept which has, I mean, it's been developed already early in the 20th century, but then took off really from the 1970s onwards. And we think it is time to rethink this concept. However, we named the initiative, or we, let's say the local friends, the local citizens that we work with there, we named it Eco Museum, the so-called Eco Museo della Via Appia. We are in southern Italy, in the heel of Italy, and it's between the area, it's in the area between Brindisi and Taranto, as you can see here. It's along the famous Via Appia, which is now, well, I mean, it's a candidate for the World Heritage List. What is an eco-museum? Or traditionally, it's perceived as a participatory practice. So it's not a museum building. No, it's a space, rather. It's a participatory practice of valorization of the tangible and intangible cultural heritage of a given territory as the expression of a local community in the perspective of sustainable, with an eye to sustainable development. So that's the Catania Charter. It's an Italian, let's say, appropriation of this concept of eco-museum, which, by the way, was developed mostly, well, initially in France. I'm not going into the details of this story, there's no time for that. What I wish to say is that, let's say, more or less confirming the Hareland perspective, we think that this definition needs revisioning. It needs revisioning. Actually, we think it's too essentialist. And again, if we go back, an eco-museum reflecting a local community and the tangible and intangible cultural heritage being representative of that territory and of that local community. That's very essentialist in the sense that that as if we would be able to define a clearly very well defined rural community with a given territory and with a very precise given heritage. And so the only thing is to do is to protect that heritage, and it will contribute to, let's say, the reconnecting of the community with that heritage, to the reconnection of that community with territory. That was the original idea, of course, behind eco-museums. Now, we think that it is too essentialist because it risks so many things. So, and here we come to the essence of the risk of citizen participation. If you stick to the traditional community, and for instance, not acknowledging that even in this rural context in southern Italy, migration has been very strong by now, and there is a significant portion of the population, let's say, not belonging to what we could call the traditional community. If you don't acknowledge that, then you risk exclusion, clearly. So, if, on the other hand, you consider community and also heritage, as I wrote here, community and heritage as processes, that is, as, let's say, processes of continuous definition and redefinition. A community is continuously developing, it's evolving, and with migrants moving in and with people moving out, and it's much more fragmented that we think than united. And the same goes for heritage. Heritage is a process. I mean, heritage is not something which has been defined from the outset with a primordial value. No, heritage is something that can be redefined, that is being redefined all the time. Now, if you acknowledge that, there is room for multivocality, for many voices to be heard, and including the migrants, for instance, including minorities, including people that indeed were marginalized before. And it offers room, much more room, for dialogue between all these various voices. So, whilst the traditional eco-museum, like many traditional heritage approaches in general, focus on community consensus, we, in this particular case, we acknowledge that there are multiple voices, and we wish to give space to this. And actually, we think that the Eco Museum should be a place, a platform for dialogue between those many voices. And again, and there I come to the crucial aspect also. We should focus on the broader societal and spatial challenges. Where do we wish to go? Where does the community, or where do people wish to go together, in what form of community? So that means planning. We think that indeed this is, this is the approach that we are following. This is the approach that indeed Harryland, the broader Harryland project is following. This brings me back to the major societal and spatial challenges at stake also in southern Italy. Of course, this is a very generalized picture, but well, the energy transition is also going on very strongly in that rural area in southern Italy. The same goes for the multicultural society, for developments of democratization, and the digital transformation is as strong as in any urban context. So we take these into consideration, and we use landscape, we use the territory as a platform, as a piazza, as the Italians say. That is the traditional open area place for dialogue. And we dialogue about multiple issues, indeed giving space to multiple voices as much as possible. In the meantime, indeed, people are encouraged and allowed to organize um, many activities to appropriate heritage and to define heritage also in their own views. So not, let's say, a top-bottom approach towards heritage definition, but we ask people, for instance, to do storytelling about their own narratives. I'll leave it with this. And most importantly, in the end, what then is the role of the heritage professionals that we wish to train? Because again, we use this eco museum. Or, I mean, using it is a bit a negative word, but we are allowed to use this eco museum as a laboratory for us, for the Haviland project, for the training project, and we train heritage professionals. And in this particular case, there's one PhD, for instance, and I saw that she's also present, Marta Ducci, who is actually engaging citizens in workshops, in interviews, in questionnaires, to try to give them to give their opinion about how to plan the future landscapes and how to involve heritage, how to define heritage within the context of these future landscapes. This is one of the results. For instance, a map of a specific area may be difficult to read, but it's a 50 hectares large area, an archaeological site, which has been completely redeveloped with local input and with attention to many local definitions of heritage instead of the traditional, let's say, World Heritage narrative that is being introduced. So the heritage professionals here are not the, let's say, top-down planners, but they are rather the mediators and facilitators bringing citizens together uh, for co-creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerd. Thank you, Hendrik. Very inspiring presentations. People are putting on many questions on the chat and also in the key in a button. I will start the one common question for the both of you, and then I will have the other ones. This first one for both speakers, then I will have different, okay, for each one. Gert, has you have a light? Oh, okay.
Yes.
And now it's okay. This the questions here in the chat. These changes in Hong Kong urban fabric show us that conflicting relationships between societies and their environments continue to grasp worldwide, bringing at challenges, to deal with landscape change. Besides engaging civil society on the participatory process in urban planning and management, possibilities is key to improve this framework. What recommendations could you both indicate for us? You can read the chat also and respond, and then I will make the other ones.
Should I, because it's including Hong Kong, maybe should I say something? Maybe I can also build in like
It's
some...
for both of you. I mean, just using Hong Kong as an example, but you can.
Hong Kong, so I leave it to Henry.
No, it's for
but I
both
think
of you.
more,
Both of you.
Well, I would say that the heritage, one thing is that in Hong Kong, the heritage legislation, right? The frameworks, how heritage is protected seems somehow very much outdated, right? Basically, all the developments that we have seen in many other countries related to a lot of other aspects of heritage and also maybe the protection of areas and so on, of landscapes, that has never happened in Hong Kong, right? And even the buildings that are protected, even so, this is kind of the most classical form of heritage preservation. Even those that are listed, they can actually be knocked down every day if somebody wants, right? So, except maybe 2 or 3. I mean, so I think certainly there should be an update of those kind of frameworks. Of course, it's not so easy because of the very different land interests. And of course, land value in Hong Kong is enormous. Need for housing is also relatively high, right? So it's very difficult to convince people why to preserve maybe a 2-story house or something if one can build 56 stories on top of it, right? So with billions of dollars and so on, right? So it's kind of it's quite difficult. However, I think we see a lot of other initiatives at the moment that are very promising and interesting, as maybe also just including one of the other questions, that, for example, link ecology and heritage, which I find quite interesting. Maybe that's also linking to the Eco Museum. A range of new, very fascinating projects. I think Lychee Wo, there's a project that was recently also receiving a UNESCO award. I think it was done by the other university, but also with some kind of colleagues from us, I think, and very interesting. So there are interesting things going on, but but it is still kind of difficult to fight for other kind of frameworks, like for example in this kind of industrial area, underground heritage. So many things we should somehow hopefully find ways of better protecting here. Yeah.
Shall I,
Gert.
shall I also give an answer? I think yes, this is a very relevant question, especially also in well, rural landscapes like the one I'm working in, since it's there maybe that landscape changes are dramatic or risk to be dramatic because they're quite often sacrificed to industry or to the energy transition. And yes, this is one of the big dilemmas that we're dealing with. On the one hand, we of course wish to preserve traditional landscapes, or the archaeology in it, or historical elements within it. But I mean, how does this? I mean, there are so many tensions, conflicts, indeed, um, with regard to all kinds of major macro regional developments like the energy transition. Because to give an example again, this area is being put full of solar panels and how do you call them, the windmills. So these conflicts we are focusing on how to solve them. Um, let's say on the one hand, heritage landscape management, and on the other hand, the let's say the energy transition that is also of course urgent. How to solve these conflictual problems depends on the local situations, I think. Depends especially also on civil society, on involving civil society. Um, because if that civil society is not being involved, it will be not well, it will feel excluded anyway, and it will be difficult to transform anything. So, but again, yes, these tensions, these conflicts are very open and very pregnant, and it's always, I mean, you ask recommendations, it is always a matter of negotiation almost between, let's say, the heritage sector and, but that's something actually which we would like to overcome, a sectorial division between, on the one hand, the heritage world, and on the other hand, the planners and the energy transitioners and the ecologists, for instance. So it is collaboration, it is project like ours that try to, let's say, that go beyond the sectoral and the disciplinary boundaries, because we have to speak to each other and try to find solutions together.
Thank you, Gert. I'll make the two questions for Hendrik, and then I will go, then there's another one for both of you. From Rogério Kahneman, in Brazil, we have several preservation areas around the preserved buildings, creating an ambience. Hong Kong has undergone several transformations in the last decade. How do you see these heritage environments? The first question from Rogério, and then from Rusudan, very interesting project. How was it integrated with the local government? Was there any follow-up? Hendrik, for you.
Okay, I think a little bit I probably answered already Rogeria's question already. No? I think that at the moment, to my knowledge, well, there are very small kind of compounds. There's one compound, Tycoon, the former police, central police station and Victoria prison, which is as as a compound is preserved. That's the only area I would know. Otherwise, it is very difficult to push through. In fact, the project I was also involved in that was related to industrial landscapes was tasked by the government also to search for ways, what they call as a point line plane approach, right? To not only look at maybe individual aspects, but also lines or planes. But it's very literally maybe seen in the government currently still, but we try to see it more multidimensional, not only an area, but also different dimensions of heritage. And we are kind of trying to make inputs into this kind of discourse and so on. I think we still have to see where maybe it goes a little bit beyond individual buildings. We have, of course, country parks, like large areas of country parks, which are luckily protected, but mainly as nature. But I think, of course, they overlap sometimes with industrial landscapes also, like these mining villages in the mountains and so on, the hills. And also now these ideas of heritage and ecology that sometimes also are close to country parks and so on. And maybe in those areas, it is a little bit easier to protect those areas. And it's also, I think, a big support by the population. Then just for the second question, which is related to the follow-up and so on. So what I showed with this kind of video filming and so on, that's a long time ago. From then we continue with basically every year, like other events, up to the point where we could, over this kind of government funding, build up this community studio, which was run for 2-3 years. That one, and basically from our own work, we became then more interested in policies that allow those projects to happen. So we will have an event with a renewable fund team soon here that is basically giving out these kind of funds. And I find very interesting also in our research how maybe one could further extend or improve those programs. For that reason, also we went to Taiwan and to New York to look at this. Now for the local political government, there have been very intensive also discussions in our projects, but also others, because I don't want to show what we do as the exception of so great what we are doing, but more as one of the examples for many colleagues that I have and civil society organizations that do similar projects, and I think that makes it more interesting for me. Now the political situation, of course, in Hong Kong is special, and you might know that we, until recently, we still have to a certain degree free election for the district councils. They don't have much influence, but a little bit of influence. And there were many people that were freshly elected in 2019. And there were quite intensive discussions and also offers from universities to work with district councils. We actually included in our projects district council election forums that we organized with Caritas together to basically on the street. Probably some of the very only kind of on the street district council election forums where people would discuss and students would come in and ask questions and show their projects, and sound very exciting. And we try to engage in this. I think there are some opportunities on the other end, as you might have seen in the media in 2021. There are kind of very fundamental changes in the election system of district councils and so on. We all need a little bit to see how are the consequences of those. But there are of course also discussions about that. Maybe I wait and let Gerrit jump in for his part. Yeah.
Okay, Hendrik, thank you so much. We are in Brazil also in a very difficult political period, so we kind of understand the difficulties of having local government involvement also in Hong Kong. I have a question here in the Q&A button from Sidi Pandki. I hope I'm pronouncing the name in the right way for both of you. He's telling, or she's telling here, thank you for these great presentations. Would love to know how the communities at the heritage destinations interact with tourism development. As local communities do benefit from the tourism industry, but also stand a chance to lose the cultural identity in the race to be contemporary to the tourists. In this context, how can we engage for both of you?
Yes, this for us is a vital question, which we try to confront, and we is not so much the, let's say, heritage professionals, the outsiders, but rather the people from EVA, the Eco Museum that I talked about, um, and with many discussions about it. The thing is that this particular area is still a non-tourist area, in between two major Italian tourist regions, and that has its disadvantages, of course. Um, Actually, in the two areas that I'm talking about are, I mean, over tourist areas. So being in between them has disadvantages in the sense that people sense this backwardness and wish to develop tourism. But it has its advantages because still they can control to a certain degree, of course, the situation. And that's what we're working on together, as a matter of fact. And then it is important to emphasize again that we don't have an essentialist perspective here. We don't think in terms of a fixed cultural identity. As a matter of fact, we depart from the opportunities offered to build a identity, to build or multiple identities as well. I mean, it is not a fear for losing a cultural identity, but seeing the opportunities offered by heritage, amongst others, to build a new identities within the context of all the societal challenges that the area has put forward. And I'm talking about, for instance, indeed, the touristification, which can be positive if accompanied well, if managed well. And that is indeed what we're focusing on, foremost by making people aware of, or making people, engaging people in the management of the landscape. And it's only in that way, of course, and that they, well, through this awareness, they also become, let's say, they become focused on the management and on responsible management of it, and on also seeing the disadvantages of over tourism. So it is a very intensive process of discussion and constant public participation and awareness raising, but also for us ourselves as professionals. I mean, you have to be aware of all the problems that are going on. So um, it is a very complex process, and tourism industry is gradually taking off, but we hope that it can be done in a responsible way with room for building multiple identities.
Gert, thank you. Now, Hendrik.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I see that the next question is also for Gert, but maybe for this tourism question, it might be also interesting to look at Hong Kong, because Hong Kong usually has, I think, over 40 million visitors every year that usually are coming, and which is basically down by 98% at the moment, and which is kind of course, a huge change, right, in the city. And so when we think about the tourism industry and of course related to heritage and so on, I think that what it shows us is fragility maybe of models that build maybe too strongly, overly on tourism, right? And maybe that could be also a helpful wake-up call in a way, right? To to see like, of course, we all hope that it becomes easier again to travel, but at least now for the last 1.5 years, right, is basically totally that, right? And with major changes, as you can imagine, if 40 million people don't come. I mean, it is a big economic question. And that also is, of course, the question then if areas were really some heritage areas as we find them in Hong Kong, some only for tourism, the kind of fake and so on, and then they have basically no, they are not used at all, right? And they were wrong probably from the first moment, right? So when students in the workshop that we just had with various students also and students from New York, I think much of the discussion was also about, is there an opportunity to see like how we can more look at local heritage for locals also, and but also believing that this probably also might be attractive also for others as well, right? Because in fact, most of us, when we travel, probably we are also more interested in products that are also more, slightly more complex and so on. In this context, I just want to mention a partner that we also sometimes work with is I Discover. So quite interesting organization, non-for-profit, that is creating tourism maps with the input of basically co-creating tourism map with local communities and local artists. They work in various places in Southeast Asia and Asia and in Hong Kong. Which is quite interesting. They also experiment with apps and so on. But what's interesting is that the content of those maps is basically the local shops and so on. They are all basically inputted by the local community and local artists that draw them, and then it's also online available and so on and so on. And this will not change maybe the entire world and so on, but I think these are kind of nice, good contributions, I believe, to help us to re-envisioning tourism in a better way. Yeah.
Thank you. I have, before I go to the fourth question, I have one in Portuguese. I will translate, and then there's a Clara. She's asking, she wants to understand a little bit more with our work, Hendrik, maybe if the magic carpet mainly, how if the work comes back for the community that really participated in the process, how is the feedback to the community? How can you?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but maybe very quickly, we thought that at the beginning of the project, to make the inputs more from our side, but then with local secondary schools and so on. But over time, basically, more and more gives the responsibility and basically to the local residents, obviously, and which to a certain degree, I would say, happened until the pandemic, where then we more and more stepped back. We became more than consultant for this Magic Lanes community studio, and there, with the help particularly of Caritas, has a lot of experience. They have this kind of local social workers that build up basically those kind of friends of this lane and so on, that then would basically organize their own projects and planting workshops, other workshops there and so on. And we stepped more and more back, right? And then we went to other communities and so on. So I guess that, well, in general, I think that the feedback was quite nice, but it's kind of easy to say if it's one event and many people come and they all smile. That's nice. But of course, the longer impact is a question. But through this community studio, we could have, on a daily basis, things happening, right? Which then mainly were organized by Caritas, and which were over 100 events with cooking studio, drawing studio. Kids could just kind of come there and stay there, and so on and so on. So to have a much more kind of community rooted and also a stronger our idea of community empowerment. Obviously, the first events to show those videos, they are not really empowering yet. No, it's kind of one event. Or for young, of course, education, yes, because many of those maybe they went to decided to study urban topics or film and so on, or maybe go into planning. That's yes, but I think it's more through then the series and things like the Magic Lanes project then that it continued and really built up more the power on the ground to take over, right?
Thank you, Hendrik. I just translated to Portuguese for Clara. Então, um pouco ele comenta que ele faz sempre esse tipo de atividade com os estudantes. Ele faz sempre os estúdios, né? As atividades de projeto que ele coordena são sempre envolvendo comunidades. Então, e sempre continua anualmente, ele volta à comunidade, ele faz. Então, de uma certa maneira, pelo ponto de vista da academia também, né? Que é o trabalho do Hendrik, ele tem sempre esse contato e com isso tem a oportunidade também de estar acompanhando todos os desenvolvimentos, enfim, né? Então, de uma certa maneira, é uma maneira dele também devolver para a comunidade e o que ele comenta também que alguns daqueles alunos que participaram das atividades em oficina, né, alunos de escolas secundárias, enfim, eles foram para a área de planejamento, ou de turismo, ou de projeto, e acabaram também se formando nessas áreas, de uma certa maneira, aquela educação, né, feita naquele momento, aquelas atividades também acabaram reverberando na carreira e na profissão, né, dos que foram envolvidos nas atividades. Espero tenha conseguido te devolver, Clara. Thank you so much, Hendrik and Gert. I just like to also remark some very important appointments of Gert that's about social construction or social constructivism, and also about multivocality and dialogue. I think there are two very important issues in the heritage and also the heritage education and heritage concern as a process. I think it's a very good, and I'd like to comment a little bit. And also, Hendrik, thank you so much for bringing our global studio, and the one that is just finished right now. We're still working on that. And then it was a very good activity to see the students from the three different cultures working on three different cities, how they interact. Again, more the learning process was better, was more important than having the design scenario or the design results anyways. So I think I would like for you both, if you could just comment a little bit on the process. I mean, how you can see heritage education, heritage engagement as a process.
Yes, maybe I can start. I'm thinking how you mean what it means, because for many people, heritage is still about tangible and intangible things, matters indeed. Whilst we now are saying that heritage is rather about it's a process. Well, it has everything to do with indeed this social constructivism, holding that indeed what we define as heritage, what we consider heritage, is not intrinsically does not have this intrinsic value that is often attached to it. As a matter of fact, in the common opinion, indeed, let's say the Acropolis is has the universal outstanding value, which is evident and everybody accepts it, and it is a representation of, on the one hand, Greek culture, but of Western culture in general, of course. That is what we could call the essentialist perspective. In the constructivist perspective, I would say that this is a construction, that this idea that the Acropolis has been defined as the key heritage element of the West or of Greece is a part of the process of identity formation, of a process of identity formation of the Western civilization and of the Greek national of the Greek country itself. So, in that process of well, national state building, and in that process of creating a Western identity, people have been, let's say, building up an identity through, well, by defining specific objects of um, specific intangible elements as heritage. So it's not an intrinsic something, but it has been defined as such, and it can change continuously. I think all of us know examples that show that heritage objects have been defined and redefined in various ways in over a period of decades, for instance, or hundreds of years. So that is what we mean with heritage is a process. What we call a heritage now is obviously completely different from what people called heritage in the 19th century. And that might change again. So heritage is a process depending on, for instance, the construction of a collective memory to sustain a community. To build up a collective memory, you need a collective past, or I mean, or a collective past is an important element. So that's what heritage serves. That role is served by heritage, indeed, to give a community a collective past. So, and that might change again because communities change, and that's what we mean with heritage as a process.
Thank you. And also, Hendrik? And
Yeah,
then,
maybe.
okay, go ahead. Then there's one more question in the just from Laura, but after Hendrik, I will read the question. Go ahead.
Thanks. Well, maybe I answer to it as a kind of educator in a context of an architecture school, no? Because I'm partly responsible for basically our the way how our architecture school is organized, and heritage, of course, has an important role. And I think that obviously much of heritage in the kind of more traditional perspective was very much related also to architecture, right? To the physical monuments and so on, which of course we are all fascinated about and so on. But at the same time, it's also we know also it goes way beyond that also. No? So I think what we try within the education in our institution and our research is probably we build up in general several kind of more interdisciplinary programs. For example, this new urban studies program and urban design program, and particularly in this kind of context of the urban studies program, we created then we worked all together with the colleagues on this project on the mountain mine, which I found for us was a kind of very interesting journey, because it was really starting with this kind of already an interdisciplinary team. And what does it actually mean in terms of all our different understandings and knowledge about history and communities and technologies and economy and so on. And I think I look forward to work more on this, because I think it can enrich those perspectives, particularly in the context of architecture or built environment schools, right? Maybe also ecology might also an important part. The other thing is, of course, is the question of also new urban agenda and the inclusion and so on, like the idea of and then with heritage together, whose heritage, right? And we had a lot of discussion in the Hong Kong case, for example, the contribution from Southeast Asia, from people from other parts of Southeast Asia, and so on. So to recognize that, and these are kind of, for me, very interesting things to focus on in terms of the learning process. In terms, another important part in our research on many levels, this kind of idea of participatory action research is kind of very important in terms of defining the issues by immediately kind of working with communities and with them, the agendas and so on. And also that also relates, I believe, to heritage also a lot. And maybe luckily or sometimes difficult, sometimes, but also overall exciting in Hong Kong is, of course, this kind of cross-section between or this situation where we are with, of course, the Asian and Western concepts, if we can generalize it as such, because there are all kind of mixed forms of that. But we're also, particularly in terms of intangible ideas of urban spaces, the fast change and so on, also as part of a heritage itself, and a process, right? The transformation, but then how, nevertheless, maybe certain things are maybe passed on in slightly different ways, not necessarily through physical permanence or persistence, but also in other ways, no? And these things we can also learn from other cultures, and these are exciting, interesting things we are trying to make our head around and find solutions for that. Yeah.
Thank you, Hendrik. I have one question for, I think, for Gert, and then I will finish the debates, because they could be here talking and discussing for many hours, but it's very late for Hendrik in Hong Kong, almost midnight. Okay, from Laura Lage. Thank you very much for the presentations. They are very good. You both have known about the Belvedere Memorandum in Netherlands, for sure. I discussed the Belvedere policy and HLC in my thesis, and I had the pleasure to know Professor Sam Turner and Graham Fairclough, also Hank Bass and Eek Hazendonk. How do you evaluate this policy? The approach is similar to the Harry Lane project, right? Did it influence the project in any way? Or do you use some tools from the Belvedere policy or historical landscape characterization? Hendrik can answer, please.
Oh, yes. Well, I think I should answer. For me, it's an easy question. All the names almost that you mentioned are in our project. So that is Sam Turner, Graham Fairclough, Hank Bass. Indeed, they are all part of it. And as I started off telling that we are a whole team of, let's say, like-minded people, schools of thought on heritage that have joined together in a consortium. That is what indeed the European Union requires as well. But also not only, and we've gone beyond the Mediterranean and to Israel, where we found Ernst Verbakel and Mike Turner, of course, both of them working with the historic urban landscape approach, of course, which is also very much in line with the Belvedere Memorandum. So yes, what we've done is bring the best of the, let's say, innovative approaches together and try to build on that and try to improve beyond that, actually, and to try to experiment our theory in practice. Just to give you an example, the so-called biography of landscape, which is a tool that has been developed in the context of the Belvedere Memorandum, which lays stress on the fact that every landscape has continuously throughout its history been reinterpreted and adapted, also physically in relation to its reinterpretation. and that long-term history can also be used as a source of inspiration for the future, for the future of that particular landscape, for the planning and the design of it. So that's where the historians and the archaeologists meet the planners. And that is exactly what we're doing. What we're doing is to experiment with the biography of landscape in real live laboratory context. So yes, our project Harryland is well, it's an amalgamation of, let's say, the project that I mentioned here, the Belvedere, the historic landscape characterization by Newcastle University, and the historic urban landscape approach by UNESCO.
Thank you, Bert. Also, I don't know if you have some time to a quick answer. There's a last minute question. I think it's opportunity from Joe Buchanan. Can take a step back in the participatory processes and engage earlier. Ideally, have the community lead the project from the beginning. Many projects are based on research funding, in practice linked to government agenda or mobilized by them as heritage. Finally, well, he is thinking, but I don't know if you can just have this last question, answer to Joe.
To whom is that? To
For both of you, I think.
I can answer quickly. Yes, I mean, you can tell from my presentation on the Eco Museum that that is exactly what we're doing. Right from the start, we engage people in defining their views about the future landscapes, and then bring that into, let's say, into the planning with the help of the planners and with the help of the governments, of course. But yes, we engage them from the very, and I think it's important. But not only the citizens, although I do think that we always also need to engage the professionals, and especially if we're talking about larger landscapes. I mean, not we're not talking about private gardens here. So I do think that we also have to involve professionals and governments.
Thank you, Gert. And about you, Hendrik, can you?
Yeah, I think that is, of course, an important point. Like how can we make this happen that really communities can lead projects and also start from the beginning? Is something that, of course, we as academics have to ask ourselves, no? Because often we are, or designers and academics and so on, because we are meddling around, right? We are somehow starting things and in the best intentions, and how much can we should we facilitate, and how much should we also step back, right? In the particular context of Hong Kong, where we mainly work, um, I think that it often also needs a certain kind of process of empowerment and creating an atmosphere in which people want to envision positively, to think about the environment, to uh, as we know, it's always very easy to get alliances and so on if people are against something, right? Like it's very easy, something is going wrong in some places, then communities actually organize very quickly, right? But sometimes also with but it's very difficult to create this atmosphere and a situation where people come constructively together for something, right? And I think with this kind of mini small project that I presented, I think that the starting point was, how can we overcome, and what we find in Hong Kong is also participation fatigue, right? Because people feel like, most of the time it's not really essentially, people will never hear, or it's always maybe the NIMBY faction that will be there, but not the others. So how can we bring in the other people? And I think it needs often really some steps before, to a certain kind of literacy, a certain kind of positive atmosphere, and so on, to from which these things can grow, and or also funding system. Um, which of course are then also government often, but and creates and contradictions. We looked at projects, funding models like Open Green, and I must say more related to placemaking than heritage as such. I think there might be, but they might sometimes overlap in some of the intentions where there exists in New York and in Taipei programs that over the years have built up a certain kind of trust and transformed from something that was more government dominated to more bottom up, and where also people then start to communities also start maybe to really propose things that are more important for them. But I think it's a journey, and I don't know if we can just kind of step back from this and say like, okay, let's just community do. Of course, we can, but I think that's why I feel something like empowerment is very difficult, but it's an important process, and it's not easy, but to work on that. Yeah.
It takes some time, and also having the confidence from communities as a whole. I mean, I think you are all involved in participatory process as a learning process, but also it's difficult. I think you have many challenges to overcome.
Also, language is also, of course, an issue. No? Like I had a very good PhD student. She wrote a work on basically the misunderstandings in the heritage debates in Hong Kong between English, Chinese, and then Chinese Mandarin and Cantonese, right? And how through translation and misunderstanding and how they were used and so on and so on. And that in itself, of course, opens up a whole kind of range of discussions when we talk about also participation, no? Because we often might not really know what the other is even talking about, might actually, or we might be understood, or we might misunderstand. And I believe in other places, certainly in New York and also Brazil, I think there are so many different, maybe also language groups and so on, right? And where it's not so easy, but important, no? How to deal with this.
Okay, thanks so much for having here all the answers for too many questions. It was very, very interesting session, many compliments and also many questions around. I think we are starting to discuss, not finishing the session, but starting our dialogue here. And I thank you all, everyone all the participants that are here, attendees, and also our great panelists and Claudia and also Tatiana and other Landy and other people that are here helping us to have this webinar. I will just pass the screen to Monica. She will just call you and invite you for very interesting complementary activities. Please, Monica.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Vera, for being the host for this session. It was a great session, and I would like very much to thank Hendrik and Gert for this inspiring and also thought-provoking session. I would like to invite you all to one of the activities of the New Heritage Approach webinar. It is a series of project exhibitions that we will start today. Those projects are in the majority authored by youth, let's say young professionals, and all of them are linked with the proposal of new approaches on participatory processes and heritage education as tools for access to citizenship, to express local identities and democratization of heritage. The projects are Now Cultural Project, Mapping Everyday Heritage with Children and Youth, Maré Cheia de Cinema, which translated to English is High Tide of Cinema, Memórias do Futuro, which Memories of the Future, And today we are sharing with you the Now Cultural project. I put the link in the chat, and I strongly suggest you to take a look at it. Just a moment, just to complement, I will just read the abstract of this project. Now Cultural is a social cultural project for the creation, documentation, and distribution of Brazilian popular art, the result of a partnership between Isabela Carpena and Felipe Pitan, researchers on art, identity, cultural, and politics in Brazil. From research and trips to the homes and ateliers of Brazilian artisans, the couple formed a network for the representation of artists based on fair trade, valuing their work and providing social and financial recognition for them. In addition to offering an accurate selection of decorative handcraft pieces, Now provides an approximation with contemporary popular artists and the rich and authentic Brazilian culture they care. The presentation of the pieces includes records in photos and videos of the meetings and conversations between Now and the artists, portraying the universe and the culture that constitute their creations. All the pieces are handmade using artisanal techniques and traditions, and that is why each one is unique. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. I'm just writing in Portuguese also. Thank you so much, Hendrik, and also Gert, for this amazing session. It was very important for us to discuss. It was very nice to know Gert, and also, I mean, I know Hendrik from other experiences, but I haven't met Gert, so I hope we can meet in presence sometime, and then continue to debate with our communities. And I think we're going to be thinking about the ideas and the suggestions and experiences that you brought to us. Thank you so much, Hendrik and Gert and Monica, to having
this. Thank you very much, Vera, and all the New Heritage Group.
Thank you, and have a nice evening, morning, day, and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Claudia, and also